Yo, this shit is crazy. Yo. You ready? You ready?
He said you're not ready.
Oh my God. Oh my God. Oh my God. You.
Bro.
In today's video, I'm going to show you step by step how to shoot portraits at night with external lights, a softbox, and some gels to add a splash of color to take things to the next level. So before we begin, you may be wondering why I chose to shoot these portraits at night, and the reason is simple. That's because of the drama. Take a look at these cityscape photos and tell me which one is better. If you say the shots taken in the day are better, you are crazy and I will fight you to the death. Because anyone can get lucky with a cell phone taking snapshots in the daytime. But to get high quality shots at night, as you'll see, it takes a lot of work. That's why we were so giddy when I added the smoke as we were shooting for hours, and then when we nailed the shots, our like heads exploded. Magical moments like this is why I love photography. Now let's talk about some of the gear you need. Obviously you need a camera, and you could literally use whatever camera you have, so I'm not gonna make any recommendations there. But for the camera I used, it was a 5D Mark IV, as it's my main camera that I use to take photos. Since I was gonna shoot at night and I didn't want to take an assortment of lenses, I decided to bring my Sigma Art 35mm 1.4 prime lens. Try saying that real fast. And for the uninitiated, prime lenses don't zoom as they have a fixed focal length. In other words, that means that you're gonna have to move your feet to zoom in and out. But the beauty of prime lenses is they have a wide aperture, which means you can capture more light. A 35mm lens is considered wide, which is exactly what I was looking for, as I wanted to get more of the scene in the photos. But when it comes to shooting portraits, it's a bit tough to work with, as you really have to get up close and personal on people's grills if you want to fill the frame. I prefer to work with telephoto lenses, as I can compress the scene and work farther away from my subjects, but I knew the people I was working with would feel comfortable with me being so close. When I shoot weddings, during the ceremony, I use two cameras. One has a 35mm lens so I could get close shots, and on my other camera body, I use a telephoto zoom lens from farther away so I could get a different perspective. So let's talk about my lighting setup. I brought with me two Young Noir speed lights, and alternatively you could call them flashes. These are clones from the official Canon brand, but the reason I use them is that they're about $280 cheaper, and when it comes to working outdoors and if something happens like a person kicks one of my lights, I won't be as upset as they kicked a $400 or $500 flash. Plus, when working with certain softboxes, the flashes may be exposed, and if they fall over, they may break, as I've had it happen to me in the past. And speaking of softboxes, I use this 30 by 30 inch Lastalite Easy Box Hot Shoe Kit. Who names these things, man? These are like long ass names, but the main reason I like this one in particular is because it's large and I knew I needed to get enough light to cover an entire person from head to toe. If I would have used a smaller one like this softbox, it wouldn't have given me enough light. And speaking of the Lastalite Easy Box, I was able to light up an entire bridal party with just this one softbox and a speed light. So you may be wondering why photographers use softboxes, and essentially you're taking this small light source and making it larger and softer. In the near future, I'll go over different light modifiers, but let's move on. Attached to my softbox, I brought this heavy-duty light stand. It was a bit cumbersome to carry around, but I anticipated it being windy on the bridge, and I knew there'd be a chance of it not toppling over. And since I assembled the Latino Avengers, I knew I had enough help to help me carry the stuff around. Speaking of stands, I just used a simple mini stand that came with the speed light. I considered bringing the Gorilla tripod, but I knew it was a bit large and bulky, and I knew just this little piece of plastic would get the job done. And the main reason I wanted to use a background light was to add what's called rim light. I used the Magmod gel holder along with the Magmod Mag Grip so that I could add a colored gel for the backlight. They come in several different colors and they can add a lot of drama to your shoot. I love Magmod products, and I'll do a more in-depth review of their products in the future. Now, to control the lights, I use a Yongnuo YN-E3RT2 speedlight transmitter, and essentially this lets me control the power of the lights without having to move back and forth to change the setting on each light. I also use an external battery pack that holds 16 batteries to help my flash recycle faster. I would have liked to have one for the backlight, but these things are super heavy to carry around when you factor in everything else. And I knew going in, I had to deal with the backlight not firing sometimes, as you can see in these examples when the flash didn't fire. It's no big deal, but in photography, there's always a trade-off, and I was fully aware that it was not gonna fire off here and there. This is one of the main reasons photographers use bigger, more expensive lights, so they don't fail when you hit the shutter. But the same 2-light setup, like the Profoto brand, can easily cost you $4,000. And one more thing I'd like to mention that's super helpful is a spider holster. It's great for when I'm working with people, as I can just holster my camera on my hip like a gun, and I have my hands free to direct people. And I don't like using camera straps because they just get in the way, and it's like the first thing I like throw out when I get a new camera. But the spider holster looks kind of goofy, but hey, I'm married, ladies, and I ain't got nothing to prove. And I almost forgot to mention this, but it's not necessary. But if you have someone around you that vapes, a nice vape would help add smoke to your photos, and it just looks super amazing. And it is just like, bring someone with you that vapes, because it's probably a lot easier than bringing a whole fog machine set up with that you'll need a plug with or whatever. So instead of buying a vape kit, you can just bring someone that vapes, and you'll have unlimited smoke. Just make sure it's not marijuana, because then they'll be super high, and then that could like ruin anything. Or I guess with some people, weed makes them a better person to be around with, but I will leave that up to you guys. Let's talk about tips on working with people. 1, don't keep people waiting around, as they'll lose their mojo. As I'm sure you've experienced waiting for a friend or family member to take your picture, and they just take it forever. Like when you get there, you're like, all right, I'm good to go. And then they're like fumbling around, and you're like, oh my God, like you just kind of lose your motivation and your mojo. So do not keep people waiting around. Don't be that guy or gal and have everything set up before you start working with your model. In my case, I always let them know that I'm just taking test shots, and when I'm ready, I'll let them know. Now, when you're taking photos of events and large groups of people, always be ready at any moment to take photos, as you might miss an opportunity for a candid shot. You need to be ready at all times to get the shot. If I tell someone to smile or cheese, it's not gonna look as natural as opposed to when someone is genuinely smiling. The main way I like to get people to smile is by joking. You have to kind of feel people out to see what you could get away with, and you gotta find what that line is and see how far you can go without crossing it. But obviously, when you're in a business setting, the line is a lot finer or wider. But when it comes to something that's more fun, let's say you could just go a lot farther and go full. Photography is supposed to be fun, and it's a people person business when it comes to shooting portraits of people and weddings, and it's not for everybody. But if you're outgoing and you're fun, it'll reflect in your photos. Remember, the camera looks both ways, and if you're happy and smiling, they're gonna feed off your energy. If you're a grumpy person or have an attitude, that's gonna reflect in the pictures as well. Now, a lot of rules are made to be broken, but this is a rule that you don't wanna break, unless, now that I think about it, you wanna joke around and just break the ice or whatever. But never take a photo of somebody and look at the back of the screen and be like, or be like, oh damn, like, never do that, because then people are gonna get self-conscious about it, and they're just gonna like ruin their whole mood. Also, be sure to show the photos as you're going along to help them build confidence. As you're making adjustments to your settings or getting the focus or whatever, communicate with them, letting them know what you're doing. right, so let's get to the nitty gritty. One thing you have to realize is that when you're working with lights, you gotta think of it as two exposures. One for the ambient light, the light that you can see, and the other exposure is for the light, the external lights. So the first step is to figure out where your ambient exposure is gonna be. Take a few shots and make sure that there's enough light in your background, as you don't want it too bright or too dark. Eventually, I settled on an exposure of 1/80th of a second and f2 and ISO 800, as that wasn't too bright or too dark. Now here's another rule that's never to be broken. When you're working with multiple lights, never just turn them all at once, as you'll have no clue what each light is doing. You have to work with each one individually to figure out the right power setting. Also be sure not to use an automatic mode, as you're gonna get varying results. Do everything in manual to get consistent shots. Now this might seem scary, but it's really not hard. Start with a medium power setting if it's too bright, lower the power if it's too dark, crank it up. So I started working with my background light first, and alternatively I could have started with the main light, but it doesn't really matter which one you're working with as long as you're working with them one at a time. And to make the photos pop, as I mentioned earlier, I use gels to add a bit of flare. Actually a lot of flare, because when you add gels to speed lights, it's like holy cow. And speaking of flare, when you're working with lights, be aware what happens when the light is being blasted directly into the lens. And this could be a good thing or a bad thing, and just be aware, because then what you'll get is some flares, and it could come out nice sometimes, or it could come out kind of distracting. I love using multiple lights with gels, as you can get some really beautiful photos anywhere at any time. Here's another shot where I use a 2-light setup. The main light was used to light up my couple, and the other light was used to light up the gazebo. I added a blue light and voila. In case you're wondering how far back I placed the backlight, it was about 8 feet away. I started with 6, but then I had to move it back a bit. Once I was happy with the power settings on my rim light or backlight, it was time to work with the main light. Eventually my final settings were f2 at 1/80th of a second, ISO 800, and 1/64th power for my main light, and my backlight was 1/4 power. Keep in mind, once you have your power settings set up and you have to move around, be sure to keep everything at the same distance. So if your backlight is 8 feet and your main light is, let's say, 2 or 3 feet from your main subject, keep everything at the same distance. In terms of the camera, you can move around as long as everything is in the same spot. If your lights aren't in the same spot, then your exposure is gonna look different, and something might be either too bright or too dark. The reason I mention this is that we had to move a couple of times because we were on a pedestrian walkway. So when you're working outside, you're gonna have to do this back and forth dance, as you don't own the streets. So first up was Justin, and in my mind I thought the orange color would complement the scene, but it was just okay. So another thing that you could consider doing is letting the person you're photographing be part of the process. So I left it up to Justin to pick a color, and he said blue, and when we added the blue light, it was like, wow, this is like a million times better. So after a while, I called Joey to come in to start taking photos, as I didn't want him to be waiting around too long, and I didn't want him to lose his mojo. So after a few shots, I asked Mike, the owner of Brooklyn Woke Vintage, which is the whole reason we were out shooting at night in Brooklyn, I asked him to pick a color, and he said purple. And after I took the shot, I was like, holy shit. I'm like, this is gonna be off the hook, it's gonna be amazing. So we kept working the scene with the purple gel, and then I just had this idea pop in my head.
Yeah, that purple really needs to
You know what we need? We need some fucking smoke is what we need. All right, get the smoke machine out. And I said, you know what we need? We need some smoke. And that's when I grabbed the vape, and it was like, boom. It was like, holy shit, this is it, this is it. This was our Mona Lisa. I'm like, man, the photos cannot get any better than this. Yo, yo, yo. You ready? You ready?
You're ready.
Oh my God! Oh my God! Oh my God! That's why we were so giddy, and we knew that was it. So after about 10 minutes of shooting photos with the bait in the scene, I saw these lights coming, and there was a police car. I knew it was gonna be party over, and the police officer came and asked what we were doing, and it was kind of a silly question because obviously we were taking photos, but he was super cool. He didn't ask us to stop, he just asked us if we could move somewhere else where there were less people, and we obliged. We didn't keep shooting because A, we knew we had our Mona Lisa and it wasn't gonna get better than this, and B, we were all a bit tired because it was like late, probably like 1 in the morning. To sum up, the key is to shoot manual everything. That's camera settings and manual light settings, as we're looking for consistent results. The first step is to get an exposure for the ambient light. You don't want it too dark or too bright, and you may want to consider using a prime lens that has a wide aperture like 1.4 or f2. Once we have our baseline exposure, we'll move on to the lights. Start with one light to see what it's doing, and then once you're happy, move on to the other light. It's that simple, and it may seem complicated, but the results you get are simply amazing. That's it for now, and if you enjoyed this video, consider signing up for my newsletter to get more videos like this, along with some exclusive tutorials in the future that you're not gonna wanna miss. Oh, and before I let you guys go, I just wanted to point out the shirt that I picked up at Brooklyn Woke Vintage, which was the whole reason behind this whole shoot. And the purple and the blue was like super apropos because those were our two favorite colors. And it says Brooklyn Zoo, shame on you, but you stepped through. Now, my hip hop heads will know what I'm talking about. The 90s was a golden era of hip hop, and Wu-Tang Clan's Old Dirty Bastard, Brooklyn Zoo, shame on you. You know what I'm talking about, and for those that don't, I probably look like a complete idiot. But thanks again, thanks for watching.